Wholeness, hey, this is Josh, and today I'm joined with Wendy Nash again for our 31st meditation Q&A called Compassion in Action. Wendy, what's going on?
Well, I'm here on Gubby Gubby country in Queensland. It's wet and tropical. It's the end of March, so it's the end of summer for us and coming into autumn. So we noticed the rain. We've had monsoons, so that's how we are. So there
Wow.
you go. Well, we had a cyclone between the last time I saw you and today, so a monsoon's nothing.
Wow, that's it's wild here in Denmark. The weather is fairly mild and stable, and we're getting out of winter and into spring here. So yeah, it's not it's either usually overcast or sunny and temperature stable. But all right, today I have in this 31st installment of the ongoing series with Wendy Nash inquiring into meditation practice on and off the cushion, we plan to go into formal compassion practice and how it can help with demonstrating compassion in daily life. So I think where ought we start with this? One of the things I think might be helpful is what do we mean by compassion to begin with? I know there's some kind of disagreement on what this even is. I think most of us know intuitively kind of what it is, but I wonder if help giving language and wording to it might help. Uh, Not just in our conversation here, but in the general sense too of how this, how we encounter this in our daily lives or not. Yeah.
Compassion, that's a good one. So, they talk about compassion. So, they talk about compassion as the sort of with desire or with passion kind of thing. But, that's a Christian in the Christian sense. Compassion in the Buddhist sense is quite different. You would know more than me, but my understanding is that compassion is that you don't want other people to suffer, actually, and dukkha. I don't mean by suffer as in douleur. I mean as, suffer as in to experience samsara for longer than you need to. You need to. Compassion in action is the topic today, and it is basically compassion is action in is essentially that. That's my take on it. I don't know. What do you reckon?
That's a beautiful way to put it, and kind of one of the definitions I've heard or ways to perceive it is, it is one of the Brahma Viharas, like Wendy was saying, and we're not talking about kind of yeah, with passion. That's almost kind of the opposite in a sense. Uh, it's I think it's when the heart is free from hindrances and like things that are blocking it. Let's just say when the heart meets suffering such as stress. Let's just say stress. When the heart meets stress, its natural response is compassion, and the Pali word for this is karuna, right? Karuna, and there's that's an easy way to put it. I think maybe another way to define it would be, or to give a sense of what I'm talking about. And I want to talk about this as a thing of compassion fatigue and push that into the future here to talk about, which is to me it's kind of a misnomer, maybe, but it's not really done in isolation either. The other Brahma Viharas balance it out, and we can go into that. And Wendy and I have done talks on the Brahma Viharas in the past, so maybe I'll link to those. But so the formal practice is, from what I'm gathering, one of the versions of it is to visualize. Let's just start, there's different beings you can visualize. You visualize an image of someone it's easy to send compassion to, starting with that, where there's really no complication. It just flows naturally. So I like these phrases. I acknowledge your pain. So, in a sense, whatever that pain may be, whether it's a physical pain, a mental pain, emotional pain, it's something where it's stressful, right? Acknowledging that. And I think that's kind of the biggest key. So it doesn't get too sappy or turn into a new age thing or getting dragged down into something it's not. It's a real experiential phenomena, this compassion. So acknowledging, you see it and you acknowledge it. You don't pretend that it doesn't exist. It's there. Acknowledge. So I'll just go through these quicker then. So acknowledge your pain and then care about your pain. So this is whatever degree of care is there, and that just means that I want to do something about it. I want to do whatever I can to help alleviate it. That's in a skillful way, even if it's just the simple acknowledgement. A lot of times that's the most helpful thing. But then then it's a wish. There's a wish. So it's like inclining the mind, inclining the heart. May your pain cease, and may you know peace. So we've got acknowledgement, care, wishing for it to cease, and then kind of the result of that ceasing of that pain is a peace. And yeah, so I think that's good enough for now. As far as formal practice, so now we were going to talk about how to take that off the cushion in action, and well, I was going to say ways I practice this in real life. I'll delay and toss it back to Wendy to say, Wendy, how do you cultivate this compassion and kind of like meditation, and then also how do you demonstrate compassion in your life as well?
So first up, we've just had a chat from somebody, Talia Mariam or Talia Mariam, who started, hey, what's is about? Okay, fifth thing, in live goodbye. So I don't know if that's a person or it's a bot. Anyway, just
Yeah,
somebody's here. So
I can show
we're,
these real quick on the screen.
yeah.
Okay.
So, so welcome, Talia or Talia, whichever way you say your name, or Thalia. So you asked me compassion in action. So I guess at some level, even just that acknowledgement of somebody, hi, what's this about? To recognize somebody is to go, okay, well, we've got somebody who's on our chat. We don't know whether it's a bot or whether it's a human, but assuming it's a human, let's respond with meet that person where they are. And I think sometimes we can think it's really big. We've got to go out, we've got to ignore our own needs in order to support somebody else. And I think going back to the compassion fatigue, that is when we are not having compassion for ourselves, not sort of being with the sort of not recognizing that we too are limited. And that's a problem. So I think that ends up with burnout and compassion fatigue and moral injury and various other forms of PTSD. And it was interesting. So today, compassion in action, it's an interesting thing to talk about because I saw that my husband had cleaned the bathroom, and he had done it, I don't know, wherever I was, but he had done it. And I just said, thank you for cleaning the bathroom. Now I say thank you for everything he does whenever, as soon as I see that he does it. I do. We've talked about this before, Josh, that it's important to just say thank you when somebody does something. So to me, that is compassion in action, because somebody has made an effort in the relationship, and I'm meeting that respect or something of the relationship with compassion. Does the person need to be a bit down and out or whatever, a bit down, in order for it to be compassion? So today I was teaching mindfulness, and I teach mindfulness to seniors, and one of the lovely gentlemen, and he was talking about his wife who is at end of life, and it's difficult. It's painful. There's no There's no answer here. There's nothing good here. He's about to lose his wife. And I would assume that they have been together for 50 years, something like that. My understanding is that they were probably quite close. And he has lost his friend. And she's there, but she's not there. Ambiguous loss. So very painful. How do you meet that? How do you meet that? So, I have my transport advocacy thing, and how does that work with that too? So tomorrow I'm meeting seniors and I'm giving the speech to 70 seniors. It's a 45-minute speech about the community group. And I want to inspire them to participate in change. Because for the greater community, we need change about better transport. And I want to try and, I guess, sort of raise their energy to take action. But it's sort of a bit tricky because at some level, I'm not sure I'm sort of riling them to get just a little bit angry in order to step into action, actually. But if you don't do that, then you can't get them to step into action. They just go, oh, well, someone else will do it for me. It's complicated. You have to. So how do you deal with compassion? I always like to do these tricky things. I don't like the easy ones where, well, if somebody's doing this, then you do that. Like, we had a cyclone the other day, and now obviously you help people if you can, if there's a cyclone. You connect with friends. How are they going? Or in our case, hi friends, we're fine. So because you want to alleviate their sense of distress. So my friends were going, I've looked on the television and I've seen on the news, your area is about to have a cyclone, a category 2. So stepping up to category 3. So it was quite nerve-wracking there for a few days, and they're going, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? So my kind of group email message to them, text in the morning and evening, going, we're good, we're good, we're good. So that also is compassion in action. So what are these nuances that sit on the edge of compassion, where you're not burning out, but you're just meeting the other person's sense of distress in some form, or some person's desire for care and treating that with respect. So that's what I would say. What do you reckon, Josh?
Wow, there's so much here. So start. We, we I love how Wendy and I can just work on multiple threads at once, and draw from this thread, that thread, and it's still all in this beautiful tapestry. And we can follow it for the most part. So yeah, there's a bunch here, and I think where I wanted to start off here is tying this back to the whole Brahma Vihara practice of also the four immeasurables, or I think what do you is that what do you call them, Wendy? You have a beautiful name for it in the Tibetan tradition. What is it again?
It's the four
The
immeasurables.
measurables. Okay, that's it.
I
Yes,
really,
exactly.
really like it because
'Cause-
the way that I think about it is it's immeasurable in terms of how often you can do it. It's immeasurable the number of different types of circumstance you can do it in. And it's immeasurable in terms of you don't know what the impact is going to be 20 years down the road, or 100 years down the road. You don't know that. For instance, there's a lady I used to walk on the rail trail, which is like a very wide bike path, footpath, and I bumped into her and I said hello, and we sort of struck up a little bit of a friendship, and then I said, we're looking for someone. When somebody came to look at the room downstairs, and she said, I'm looking for a room. So so that those little small bits of conversation which we shared up to that point, I didn't know that she would actually be our really fabulous person living downstairs now, who's going to help me with the community group. So I think that's a good example of, you don't know where the compassion in action, you don't know, it's immeasurable. So there
Yeah,
you go.
yeah, and it also can't really be quantified, right? Calculated, like Wendy was saying, and it's boundless. There is no limit to it. It is really profound, and yeah, it's like trying to catalog the ocean. By the time you even get started, it's already changed so much that it's impossible, right? But it's vast, and beautiful too. And for anybody that hasn't listened before, Wendy's in her group, she's talking about, not to oversimplify here, but bikes, putting more emphasis on biking. So that for those that haven't joined us in the past, right? And not
Just
just that, but go ahead.
just
Yeah,
to
sure.
clarify, I want to just, okay, it's called, it's about getting more transport choice with a less hassle. So you've moved to Denmark from the US. So you've come from a car-dominated society, and now you've gone to Denmark, which is, you have more transport choice. What's that experience like for you? Like, how does that feel in terms of your sense of the society and its sense of compassion for people of different body types and financial situations and desires? So compassion in action from the actually the government. So what do you think about that? The US compared to Denmark?
Yeah, the transportation. Well, let me do one thing at a time here, and maybe I'll work that in. So, the importance of these Brahma Viharas, I feel, are, and I just recently kind of learned this, that every first meeting everything with metta, loving kindness, and then when that loving kindness meets stress, then it turns into compassion, and then the problem with the compassion fatigue and is that it can get really bogged down. We can go into some really stressful situations. And one of the things is that, yes, empathy is nice, and we have to have empathy. Otherwise, it's kind of sociopathic, psychopathic. It's enough empathy to connect with what's going on. But if I then continue where I match the other person's stress level, well, then now we have two people that are suffering and in stress, instead of this the beginning. So then I'm unable to uplift and be more responsive and wise and loving in my action, when I'm dragged down too. So to suffer with is not necessarily, I feel that it's just enough to be able to connect and then have a wise response of the heart to acknowledge that suffering and to well wish. And then to me, compassion in action is actually offering to, so say, oh, hey, this is a common phrase that I've used in so many times in my life, especially even when I'm suspicious of people, of whatever. I will go up and say, hey, is everything okay? How can I help? Is there anything I can do? So offering to do doesn't mean I have to do it, but just offering to say, okay, is everything okay? And it has to come from a really genuine, authentic place of the heart, not like me saying, okay, I'm above you. Are you okay? I'm okay. I mean, I'm great, but you suck. And then, I want to make sure that that I'm better than you, and I'm here, you know, um, in some kind of position above you, and going to, demonstrate my power that I can help you. Not in that sense, in the sense that there's a genuine sense of care there, to the best of our capacity, wherever that is, and just seeing, and not forcing my help in what I want, because a lot of times it's driven out of, okay, this is annoying me, this makes me feel uncomfortable, so I want to do something so I don't have to feel that discomfort, and sense of, "Ugh, I don't like this," so that is a pity, and that's like the near enemy of compassion. Now, when Wendy was talking about, um, acknowledging her partner with the bathroom, I would say that probably goes into the next one of Muditā, which is a celebration or a rejoicing that, but in a way, not in a superficial way, but it's saying, okay, it's no, I don't know, but. Um, it is an acknowledgement, but it's also like, hey, what you did here is going to help. It helps you, it helps me, and then it helps us. It's harmonious. It's something worth acknowledging and rejoicing in a way that this is a beautiful act of care that's been demonstrated, and this mudita can help when we do get too bogged down in situations. I was reflecting this morning on really challenging times in my life, and when Wendy mentioned self-compassion, which is so important. This is not just me and other beings. This is me for myself too, right? Having compassion for myself, and noticing that, or when these memories come up from time to time, and just having compassion for who I was and what I was going through during that time. And if we really, though, get bogged down in something where it is really, lowering it's so much, then this is where mudita can come in and start thinking of things and inclining the heart to uplift it. Okay, what can I see in here worth of rejoicing? And one of the things is care. I care enough. I'm actually spending the time to do this. Most people wouldn't do it. Most people, not most people, but whatever. A lot of people wouldn't have the courage to face this, or they don't really care. They're indifferent. But the fact that I am willing to help here is something worth rejoicing. It's a beautiful quality in the world. So that I can have resources to potentially draw upon if it gets too tough. That's something worth rejoicing. So this is a balancing, and all these things balance themselves. And sometimes with compassion, I'll just say that the most compassionate thing we can do is set boundaries and reinforce them. Because abuse is never okay, and these things are necessary. I can rejoice in the fact that that person taught me to leave, or to get out, to set a boundary and to enforce them, to stand up for myself. That's what I can rejoice in, that not in what's happened, and saying that's okay, but saying, okay, now I'm learning boundaries, now I'm learning to enforce those. And then equanimity is the fourth Brahma Vihara. And this is kind of an acknowledgement that I'm responsible for myself, and everybody else is responsible for themselves. Even though I care and want to do whatever I can, they're subject to their past actions, just as I'm subject to my past actions and my current actions in the fruit of those actions, when they're done intentionally, with intentionality. So sometimes there's just nothing we can do, and we can just rest in this even keel notion of, yes, there's care there, but I can only do so much. I can't live the other person's life for them. And this is what kind of balances out everything else, or are kind of where all these other beautiful qualities draw from an overarching quality. Okay, so I think when was there, the compassion fatigue. We'll come back. No, let me just address that real quick. So I think that there's something off with that, because compassion is supposed to address fatigue, and so I think one of the ways to do this is the mudita. When things get really rough and we get really dragged down, then it's not wise and helpful anymore to keep staying in that. So I feel it's time to uplift the heart, to balance that out a little bit. It seems like, right, to notice things worth rejoicing. I know I'm being a little bit abstract here, but maybe some examples will come to me, because we all know this when things get really rough in our life. And I'm not saying go out and do things superficially, but like really search the heart for a balance of where it can be uplifted more. We can reflect on the goodness that others have showed us, the goodness that I've done, and that not just superficial, but things that have actually come because of it, even if it's just an energetic feeling of uplifting the heart. Because then if I'm too dragged down, then I can't really take care of myself, take care of others, respond wisely in the world, or even know when not to get involved with this a type of action too. So this is kind of the compassion in action. And Wendy's transportation thing. So it is really a mind bender in some ways to be in Denmark here for 3 months, and I go to England here, and very soon, and I'll be. We won't have we may not have one next month because of that, and even in May, but in June we've got one scheduled, Q&A here, Wendy and I. But so in Denmark, there's not a. I'm not used to all the. There's so many ups and downs in the States for me. Here, things seem more stable. You know what I mean? And people kind of, at least in a rural area where I'm at, people tend to be more to themselves. And even in Copenhagen, everybody just seems so kind of polite, and people kind of mind their own business. And there is one instance though I've noticed when walking down the sidewalk in Copenhagen, a lot of people go two by two, right? And they will just not move whatsoever to let me by when I'm walking by myself. And so I find myself more times than not yielding, either stopping or getting onto the street. And it's just like, and apparently from what my partner said, that that's just kind of the cultural thing. They don't really mean anything by it. If they're just not really paying attention, and that's just how they do. It's not a lot of emphasis on considering the other person. And so, how is the heart with that? Of course, I get a little bit indignant. I mean, surely, yeah, one or two times, but come on, yield for me. I'm yielding for all these people. What is the deal? And then the other tendency is the opposite. Okay, I'm just going to barrel head. They're going to yield for me whether they want to or not, and I'm going to stand my ground. I'm just going to go straight, and so it's just this. It's an interesting interplay like that, and it's not personal, and it's trying to get over that. And of course, then I feel compassion for myself and not being able. My biggest line is, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't speak Danish yet." And they're, "Oh, no problem." Everybody's so accommodating and so inclusive and speak English so well, And I guess there's just not enough shame yet to to motivate to speak, to learn, to actually start to practice Danish. Because then I feel a little bit like, oh well, I'm putting them in some kind of spot where they're gonna have to, be awkward with me trying to speak, even though I know that a lot of times they will appreciate it. So there's all these different complex dynamics. But as far as I've gone on and on too much here. But as far as transportation goes, I really think it's the way you framed it, Wendy. I would frame it just a little bit different. It's a whole mindset. That mindset just does not exist in the States. In some of the cities, it might, but it's just so accepted, so culturally interwoven, and so just a way of normality that people really don't even consider this until maybe they travel to another place, or like when I travel to another place, and I just realize that it's just there and it's solidified. So it's not like there almost needs to be some kind of transitional period to kind of see the differences. And I can't even imagine how much, if they wanted to change to something else, or if the United States wanted to change to something else, because it just seems so established in both places, and kind of a rigid mindset in both places. That's why I feel that travel is kind of important, because then we can actually see this dynamic at play, and how kind of oblivious both cultures are to anything different than how it is. I shouldn't say oblivious. I'm just saying that, yeah, it's there's significant differences, and people don't realize how ingrained and established their way of doing things is. So yeah. So thoughts on all that?
All right, okay, but first up, we have Mrs. Reed again
Oh,
today,
hey.
which is so lovely.
Yeah.
And she says, "Yeah, best compassion is alive and lived in life." Also nicely put, Wendy. Thank you very much, Mrs. Reed. Lovely to have you here again today, a real person. So one of our regulars, definitely. So lovely. And I think instead for joy, and I can, that's, uh,
Rejoicing. Are they altruistic joy, sympathetic
okay.
joy, vicarious joy? Yes,
All
I
right.
think that's very different.
I've got a
Sure.
better term. I've got a
Okay.
better term. It's confelicity, which is an English word, and it means that you celebrate in the happiness of another person, which I think is
Convelicity. That it reminds me of.
confelicity.
It's almost like but it's
Confelicity.
not convoluted, is it? Is that where it's
No,
no?
confelicity.
Felicity,
Felicity.
not
Uh,
felicity. Okay,
yeah,
felicity. Yeah,
felice.
confelicity. Like
Felicity.
fidelity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
No, fidelity.
No.
Fide, it means fide comes from truth, I think.
Okay.
But felicity is happiness.
Ah.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you think of Schadenfreude, think of
Yeah.
the opposite.
Okay.
That's
Great.
confelicity.
Yes.
So I just to put that as a heads up. But I think that your definition of I've heard that one where you have love and then compassion and then joy and that when it's too much one, then you move into the next. And I think that's too tidy. I want to just put it out there. I think it doesn't work like that. Like, we're not one thing. And I don't like this, I guess, um, the Greek philosophy. If you love, then you cannot hate because somehow they are one contradicts the other. But that's not true. You can love someone and hate them at the same time. It's complex, but it's true. Now, I think that it is possible that in that situation, I'm going to take that one and pull it apart a little bit. But before I do, I just want to say what you're bumping up against is your own cultural expectation that other people should yield to your habits. So it's just a habit. This is what makes living in foreign countries really difficult. I've done it a few times and it's really hard. And by the way, I'm going to shame you until you learn Danish because
Please, please do.
every
Yeah. Don't
time
let
we
me.
meet, I'm like, how's your Danish
Yes.
going?
Exactly.
Because
Yes.
it's not that hard. It's not a hard language to learn.
Oh, come on.
And I'm like,
The
get
Danes tell me it's one of
stopping.
the hardest ones to learn. So
Oh
anyway.
no, it's not. It's absolutely not.
Okay. I like that.
We've got some
I like that.
interesting ways of counting, but apart from that, it's
Yeah.
super easy. You pick it up in a doddle. You're clever. It's like really easy. It's much easier than French and like Chinese or Japanese. Like, get
Sure.
over yourself.
Okay.
So
No, it is good. The grammar is actually not that different from English.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like half of it's in English anyway. Well,
The,
don't worry
that's
about it.
true. Yeah. Anyway,
You know,
spelling and pronunciation is anyway.
pronunciation is a little bit more tricky, but
Sure.
pronunciation in English is tricky.
I
Whatever.
don't need it. Excuses aren't going to help me anyway. I understand that. They're not
Yeah,
going to help me learn
get over
it.
yourself. Get over yourself. So, okay, all right. So, in that instance, is that compassion in action? In
Mm,
fact, because here am I saying, look, I've heard. To me, I just hear excuses.
yeah.
Oh well, I don't want to put them uncomfortable. I'm like, nah, that's rubbish. You don't want to do it. You don't want to make yourself uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But of course, when you're in a foreign country, so that is appropriate that you should be learning that language. I
Sure
mean,
it
that's the
is.
way that I see it.
Of
So
course.
when I hear sort of like, yeah, yeah, no, 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 I don't want to make them uncomfortable, well, I'm just like, yeah, get over yourself. So,
Yeah.
so is my action there compassion in action? And I would say, yeah, because I'm sort of able to speak quite sternly in a playful way, but I'm quite
Sure.
stern. I'm quite
But
serious.
in a helpful way too. You don't
Yeah,
have bad intentions to tear down someone and make them worse off. This is the intentionality behind all this. This is where, yeah, the intentionality is so important. Go ahead. Yeah.
so to me,
Mhm.
this is an act of love.
Yeah.
So I think that um yeah. So I think this idea I think what is really important is to have is that it's dynamic. Everything is so dynamic and it's not neat and tidy categorizations of, philosophy. Everything is categorized in a separate place as if things are objects and not
Yeah.
relational. If you think about interdependence and dependent arising, and I'm sorry for people who aren't so familiar with those Buddhist terms, but I'm just going to give you a bit of heads up. So there is this term called emptiness, and what that means basically is everything sits within a context. And dependent arising, which is that if you have this, then that, and then that's how you have two reeds leaning together. So you have one bushel or whatever it is, and then you have your stack of reeds. Clearly not done in today's vernacular, but but you get my thing. You get my vibe there.
Causes and conditions. Yeah. Yes.
Exactly, but it's also if you take away one piece of any situation, then So you could say, all right, so you're walking down the street and you've got two people. I'm going to call it a couple, just for simplicity's sake. And you're walking down the street, and this couple are doing that. Now, you're affronted by their lack of desire to yield, their lack of yield, okay? And you're saying, well, that's me. They are being rude to me, okay? And and now you're in Denmark, and this is the cultural norm. So you take one of those away, which is the couple, where you don't have to worry about that. You take yourself away, then you don't have to worry about it. You take your American conditioning, well, don't do that, or the couple you're walking down the street in the US, and then that changes the cultural more. So you the thing about dependent arising and emptiness is you take away one piece and the whole picture completely changes. So we're talking about compassion in action. So, which I'm not sure we're doing such a good. I try and bring it back, but I'm not sure
It's a
we're
work in
doing
progress for sure. Yeah. And
so.
mm,
Yeah, you go.
okay, so in that situation, yes, all these different perceptions are playing a part in it, and I guess the really heart of the matter here is what how do I act, how do I respond? You know, the perceptual level will help a lot, but in practicality, what do I do? You know, and that is even based on a projection, I guess, of oh, it's going to happen the same way every time, which I know it's not, because eventually there's going to be some yielding on that part. It wasn't 100% either. And this is so. Then another thing, this is such a petty thing. I think with all the challenges in our world, to me to use this example and spend so much time on this, but you know, we work with what we got, I guess. So the intentionality here is really helpful. I think really important too. And but I want to address Wendy's point of these neat and tidy boxes. Yes, in the way I put it, yes, that would totally valid criticism. It doesn't work like that. This is me trying to put words on an ideal situation, right? And but what happens in the mess of reality is that we just have to draw upon whatever wisdom is there and kind of trust that, okay, what's needed now? That question, I think, is of a paramount practical significance of navigating in the relational world. You know, what's needed now? Whatever we find ourselves in is the way we're continuing doing things or are perceiving things and viewing things. Is that needed to continue and be more of, or is something else needed? And then if something else is needed, trusting that, you know, whatever capacity is, that will come to us, or we'll learn about it as we make a mistake. You know, so this question I think is really important. And yeah, if we can kind of train the heart, that's why these are formal practices too, that if we train these formally, then the heart and mind kind of naturally more inclines to that way of being in the world. And yeah, and then we kind of get to and then practice in daily life, and then that will inform our formal sitting practice, and the depths of and nuances that we go into with that and our capacities. I feel perhaps as well. So yeah, the go ahead.
Okay, all right, okay. I want to go back to the footpath example. I think it's a really good example. I think it's
Okay.
super good. I
Hmm.
think because it's so small that it niggles, but it's not. But it's also petty. I really like it when it's
Really
petty because
petty
it's
and
really
common.
petty.
Common.
Yeah, you know, and you kind of
Everybody
you've
can
tried.
relate to this situation. Yeah.
Yeah, you're really
Mhm.
riled up, and it seems really insignificant, and all the rest.
I kind
But
of
here,
just think, why is this happening? You know, surely, statistically speaking, somebody would yield out of like 50 times. Maybe just one couple would do it, you know, and maybe one
okay,
did, but anyway, you know, it's just kind of like,
okay.
how is this happening? It's just kind of bewilderment, you know.
You know, you're in another culture, so
Exactly. Exactly.
you're having to bend to somebody else's culture, and this is what
Mhm.
makes living in foreign countries really difficult and quite lonely making in times because you go, why are they doing that? I feel so alienated. Are they against me? You know, it leads into all these other things.
It's such a
But
good opportunity for practice, though, too. Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
so I've got a friend who I teach mindfulness with. It's more insight. I meet her every day, well, 4 days a week, and she's got some mental health issues. So I just meet with her, and then I just go, "What do you want to practice on today?" And then I do a 5 minute meditation, and then we talk about what arose. So um, it's been super helpful. In 5 months, she's just changed from being somebody sobbing in the corner, just unable to function, to being somebody who's now going, well, maybe I can volunteer somewhere. So it's fantastic. It's just,
Awesome,
and
Wendy.
she's going,
That's good.
wow, I realize I've been wrong about my husband. All these years I've been holding a big grudge, and I've been blaming him for years, and this. So she and I have these amazing, beautiful, wonderful conversations. And I'm learning too as I go, like what happens in what happens in my world. And I met three big highfalutin directors the other day at the council, and the meeting. They said some things which was very confronting for me, and I'm quite thrown for six for that. And and I can feel some lack of compassion. So just what I've noticed with my friend and I, and her lack of compassion, because she gets into these rages where she's completely outraged. She's raging outside of beyond. She's outraged. And she, as I was sort of talking with her and I thought about myself and my own pain, what I realized is that outrage sort of comes from feeling like a victim, and that the victim comes from feeling disempowered, actually. And so I put it to you. So, and then as I think about my three directors that I met the other day at council, I actually feel very disempowered by what they say, and that's what makes me really angry with them. So I'm having to sort of think about that. So I put it to you, in your footpath issue experience, whether you feel a bit disempowered somehow, and this is sort of niggling at the corner of your heart and causing this hardening of the heart, and you lose compassion for the fact that, well, they're in their own little world. And so, as a woman, I'm always crossing the street. Like, I don't just have to yield, but I have to cross the street, and I have to find new ways of whole new streets to walk down, or I have to walk in the middle of the road if it's depending on the time of the day. So to me, what you're describing is so tiny. I'm like, well, why don't you just yield? What's wrong with yielding? Why do you, so why is that? But nonetheless, that is your experience. And you can hear my sense of outrage, like, what is wrong with you? Like, you can hear, I'm like, have no compassion for your experience.
No,
And
go ahead.
yeah, but what I want to say is, um, actually, I feel disempowered in my own streets because I want to walk down the street and feel respected, and I want to feel safe. And more often than not, I just don't. I get yelled abuse at because I'm on a bicycle. I get people parking in the middle of whatever. I had two telecommunications guys park their stupid van on the footpath. And I'm going, park on the road. And they're like, we can't. We're not allowed to. And I said, well, you're not allowed to park on the footpath either. But this sense of disempowerment that sits in the basement of the hard heart, that causes the victim, that causes the hardening of the heart and the lack of compassion. So, and then the outrage and the entitlement. So there you are. I've just put something forward to
No,
you.
this is so important, and I think I would venture to go into the fact that we're living in a culture of outrage now, and that it's even deliberately invoked a lot of times in the media. It's one outrage to the next. So this can't be overstated enough how important this is, and how Wendy broke it down here into this notion of, yeah, victimhood and disempowerment and outrage. It's so vital at the times we're living in here. And I will just say for the record here that I did yield. I think maybe one or two times out of, I don't know, 50, just guessing here, that I didn't yield, because I'm just not that personality type where I'm just going to put my head. I've, yeah, when I was that way in the past, let's just say it did not work out well for me. So I don't, yeah, I just yield. And I think maybe kind of a defense mechanism is this kind of, wow, I can't believe this. Not so much outrage. It's just like, I just bewilderment, or like, how is this happening, kind of thing, you know what I mean? But it is disempowering. That comes from a place of I don't feel empowered. I feel disempowered, or disrespected at least. But it's not that, but it
But
just
I want to
feels that
say
way.
disrespected is a
Mhm.
kind of justification. But I think in the base of emotion of that is really saying, I feel disempowered. And I think it's
Sure.
okay to say, I feel disempowered.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people do feel disempowered. It's very corporatized.
Yes.
You can't talk. I mean, I can talk to politicians. I talk to politicians all the time. But, excuse me, I once wanted to take in some things into the government, into the Department of Transport. And I had these envelopes, and they said, you can't deposit that here. You have to post them. And I was like, but I'm just delivering something. No, you can't do that. We don't accept anything. And I guess they're afraid of bombs. But to me, it struck me as that the government is now so impenetrable in this corporatese, and nothing makes sense. You ring up the Social Security department and you get to the end of the queue. And as somebody said to me in the queue when I was unemployed, he said, but there's no one there. And so going back to, you get to the end of the line and they just read off the screen. And it's not just unemployed people, but my friend used to work in the emergency department, and he would be able to go, "G'day, Dave. What's the go on this medication?" And he'd go, "Ah, look, this is the deal. This is that. This is that. Probably you could get away with it in this circumstance. That, yeah, you could probably do it." But instead, he gets, Taran, who's 22 years old, who's reading off a screen. And so he's disempowered from doing his job. And then that led to a whole lot of moral injury, where he feels no. So just going to your initial thing about compassion and burnout and compassion fatigue, he wanted to treat patients, but he said what you had to do was you couldn't create any delay in treatment. You had to get through the numbers. So you get through the easy ones first, because otherwise the wait list time is really high, which gets marked down on your KPIs, which then goes into the press. And then there's outrage. Why was the wait time at the hospital XYZ time? And he's going, I want to treat the people who are really seriously injured, but I can't. I've got to deal with these people who come in with minor stuff. So I think this thing about outrage, disempowerment, compassion, I think is part of the same thing, because when I feel hard-hearted, literally I feel hard-hearted, my heart feels very hard, because my heart is hard.
Yeah.
My heart is hard,
Yeah.
and I don't want to um, and I think it is because I feel disempowered. And I think this is part of that larger picture. Why do we feel outraged? Because we actually feel disempowered. We've just lost the sense of compassion. And yes, I think it's fueled by social media.
Well, and not only that, you talk kind of even a more classic thing of bureaucracy. At least in the States, I haven't really experienced it so much here, in other places. But it's, yes, I get it. These systems are in place to make things less confusing, kind of more efficient. But when they get to be a problem is when people won't budge. They won't use their intuition or their common sense to address something a little bit differently, right? That they're a hard line on the things, but life doesn't work like that. You can't
Mm.
just do everything from the book all the time, because then you're like a robot. And we don't, because if yeah, you don't treat people that way in every single instance, you know what I mean? Or you can at least explain to them why it's the case, and spend just an extra moment saying, why it's like that, instead of just being cold and, okay, I can't deal with it. But then some people just, they're already traumatized and enough pain themselves. They don't have the capacity, or they're not, they don't want to be doing what they're doing, so they're not going to take that extra step to do what they can to be helpful. So even more reason why compassion is needed, and I would say, yeah, there is a financial, at least a financial, if not way more insidious, incentives for media, and especially social media, to incite outrage. It gets people emotionally involved. It gets more eyes on the screen, more involvement, more attention, and the longer people can stay on screen interacting, the more data can be harvested, and the more data that can be harvested, the more control can be implemented, and the more money can be generated through ads and predictive models and things like this, amongst other things that they haven't even figured out what they'll use for it in the future. Just collect all the data you can. The reason to, one of the ways to collect all the data you can is make things addictive, make people more on there, and outrage is one way to do it. And it's just this what they call it, Pāli crisis, where it's just, you turn on the news, it's just one crisis after the next. And then the one that happened, 24 hours, 48 hours ago, what happened to that? A lot of times they don't even report on the follow up of it. They're just on to the next crisis, and then more outrage. So, yeah, and so one of the things is acknowledging this and waking up to it, and seeing it. And then, yeah, what do we do? What do we do about it? Well, if we're caught in the midst of it, compassion, but then we also have to bring wisdom into this, to make decisions, where we don't put ourselves in these situations to begin with. I think is one of the ways to do it. Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting thing. We don't put ourselves. So it's true. It's true. But it's sometimes we can't walk away.
Yes.
So for me, with my community group, it is about, I can't walk away from this. I sort of started something, and I don't want to walk away, actually. I don't want to turn a blind eye, and I'm spending my time going, hey guys, you guys need to look at this, because this is a real problem for you. As much, it's more of a problem for you than it is for me. I'm just kind of the messenger. But you can do the Stalin-esque approach where you shoot the messenger, and that's basically what they do. And so,
Power is
but
really
then,
important to Wendy, when it comes to these governmental things, because that it's about power. Those people are in power, and a lot of them are career, and they're looking to stay in power. And how do you do that? Well, you make sure that nobody confronts that power, and that you're more powerful than the next person. So this is where
but
you have to engage in politics. And yeah, there's many other ways to address this in politics, but it's
sure,
a dirty
sure,
game. It can be very dirty at times. But
sure.
if you do get a payoff, you do get a payoff, well, then you get a payoff, or you get a change, and you're working in the system. And yeah, there's all kinds of things, only so much wiggle room within that system, and there's a training within that too. Yeah.
But I think also, I, and let's hope I'm wrong, but I think that we are heading into a war, and I've thought this for a long time. We're heading into a global war, and more acutely now than ever. And certainly there are other things. So what do
Well,
you
hang on.
do?
Do you mean a traditional war, like a World War
Yeah,
III, you think?
yeah, I
Well, a lot of
do.
people have predicted that for quite some time. And I would say, at least, it's more of a war of hearts and mind and soft power now. So it's a war for control of the hearts and minds, and control of the narrative. Because as we know, most people, their reality is not actually what reality is, but it's a narrative about reality. So if the narrative can be controlled and dominated, that's pretty much, then they don't really, if the people in power can get people to control themselves, or to censor themselves, and to fight themselves and fight amongst each other, then other powers don't need to get involved in certain ways. So this divide and conquer tactic, I say.
I think there is that. That's, it's a little bit close on the edge of a conspiracy theory, so I don't want to go down that too much.
Sure.
I was thinking, I have a godson who's 20, and I look at my friends who have boys who are young, and I go, well, in war. So if there is a war and there's some strange political things happening around the world, then if you always look away, what does that mean, actually, to just always look away? Is that compassion in action? At what point do you decide? So it's interesting. So there's a comedian here, her called Magda Żabanski. Her father is Polish, or was Polish, and she found out quite recently that he had been an assassin during the Second World War, and he had killed lots of people. This is her father. And he was on the side, he was against the Nazis, and he was killing traitors. And he killed people because they wanted some food for their families, and they were starving. And Poland was grindingly poor. It was just, the Nazis really cleaned them out in a big way, like they did with the Netherlands. Lots of places, they just cleaned them out. And so these people, and he would just shoot them. Well, you are a traitor. I don't care what your story is. I'm going to shoot you. Now, in that instance, it's complicated. Tell me, where is compassion in action?
So the guy shot the Nazis. Is that what you're saying? Or so
The
no.
traitors, the Polish people who wanted some food for
Uh-huh.
their
Yeah.
families. How do you deal with, and then you've got the Nazis
Mm.
and they are taking over your country. You cannot
Mm.
always look away.
Yeah.
So compassion in action, how do you deal with that?
Mhm.
This is
So
this
yeah,
is the stuff I like to look at.
it's very complex, and this is where these thought experiments. The first thing I like to start off with these, they're brilliant to look at, and I'm not dismissing them. I'm just saying when we're in a situation, as we know, that when we think about it beforehand, sometimes it happens like that, but a lot of times it happens in completely different ways. So let's just start off that way, because you can't really know what you would do in a certain situation. There's so many factors and conditions involved. It's too complex. Real life is way more complex than some kind of thought experiment that just kind of amplifies my views. But the way it actually plays out in reality is oftentimes so far from how it is. So in that sense, yeah, just take what I say with a grain of salt. But so again, this comes back to intentionality. Do you want to harm and then justify why you're harming, or do you really want to commit to non-harming? And so I'm in a unique situation where I don't have a family to protect, so this is different. I can't Who am I to say to people with families to protect, oh, you should be a complete radical pacifist like I am right now? I can't say that. I can just invoke the
Hmm.
non-aggression principle, which means that no one has the right to aggress on anyone. At the same time, once force is initiated, everyone has the right to protect themselves and the ones they love. Okay, so no one has the right to initiate force. However, they can defend themselves. So this is why I still protect or uphold the Second Amendment in the United States, because ideally we'd be in a state of consciousness where
I
we
don't know what the Second Amendment of the United
right
States is.
to bear arm, to have
Oh
guns,
gosh, terrible idea.
to
Bad, bad,
protect
bad.
to protect yourself, right? So the first
Oh,
thing
bad.
the first thing that dictators do usually is they come in and they take everybody's weapons, and then people are completely defenseless, even if it's just a psychological thing. So that's the first thing they do. That's the way that people get in a lot of these mess, and we can go down that whole route. And I won't own a gun, but this is why I protect that, because they could take away the guns, and then you have no really psychological means to protect yourself whatsoever in the ones you love. So
I think you're crazy, Josh. I think
so yeah, but
it's
so are
because
dictators. Dictators are beyond crazy. They're psychopathic, and they don't care that that you should be able to protect yourself. But anyway, so let me put that aside and say this is where these things evoke emotions. Politics is an emotional con game. I'll just say that all these things are emotionally loaded questions. They're designed that to trigger people out emotionally, and then once people can't it's to behave in a way, then the people that with all the power, they look at the populace and they say, these people, they can't do that. We have to control them because they can't control themselves. And so this is where some things get in. But I want to just say here, the intentionality. do I want, am I committed to non-harming and peace? Or am I just going to use harm to justify what I want in the world, you know? And I think this is a really important thing to commit to. And I'll just put out the vast cycle of time. This is where it's helpful to know that, yeah, I'm not asking anybody to believe in rebirth, but it's just, okay, what are the consequences of my actions long term? The classic Buddhist thing is that some of these wars just have to play out because due to people's past actions, this is how they're fruiting. They're fruiting in this war, and it's just going to be hard for anybody to get out of it just due to their past actions that are now taking fruit. That's one way to look at it. It's a very complex issue. How courageous is it though, actually, to face down someone that's threatening my life and saying, I love you. I love you. Now that's pretty crazy, but like you're gonna die anyway. And so at least I could go out saying, I am committed to non-harming, I'm gonna set an example here, not as a martyr, but to say that this will never end. If I just continue violence with violence, harm with harm, again, I'm not recommending that for anyone with family and loved ones who have to do what they have to do to protect their loved ones. But what I really want to put emphasis on here is the intentionality of well-wishing and non-harm and peacefulness in our interactions, because it really does make a difference. So that's what's important with these things.
For sure, for sure, for sure. We are over time, Josh.
Yes. And sorry for
Well, it got a bit
rambling.
heated there. I think it's the
Well,
most heated conversation we've ever had.
anytime you bring in Jewish people and Nazis, it's a huge emotional trigger. We know how loaded
Are
that
you
is.
Jewish? I
That's
didn't
no, no,
realize.
no. I'm not. But I'm saying this
Okay.
thought experiment. Okay, if you're hiding Jewish people and the Nazis come, and say, "Hey, are you harboring Jewish people? Would you lie to them or not?" And so this thought experiment is like. It's so loaded. It's such a loaded thing. What's to say that Nazi's not going to come in there no matter what you say? You know what I'm saying? So
I
when
just
you
thought it
say
was
Jews and Nazis, it's a hugely loaded emotional question. So if you just put two different demographics in there,
it's
it
interesting.
lowers the emotional charge. Yeah,
It's interesting what you heard, because I actually talked about a Polish guy
I know you did. Yeah, yeah,
and the Nazis, and you then put in the Jewish, but the
sure.
Nazis did plenty of other
Oh,
horrible
totally.
things
Oh,
that had
totally.
nothing to do with Jewish people.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I was just talking about, what do you
Oh, I
do as
know.
a daughter
Yeah.
to a father going, "He was an assassin. Is this my father?" And, complex relationships that we have with our parents. I just thought it was interesting to play
Sure.
around with that. But I still think you're
Well,
crazy for thinking that everyone should be able to bear an arm, and I'm so
yeah.
glad you're in
But they
the
also have the right to not have it too. So giving the right to do it also means you have the right to choose not to have it as well. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think everybody
Well,
has to have a deal where they don't you walk around with guns all the time, because
mhm.
otherwise you've got people who are crazy and
Yeah, but
people who are
the criminals that aren't going to pay attention to that. The
yeah,
criminals are
but
still going to do it, and the criminals get guns illegally anyway. So,
you need to look at some stats on guns in order
yeah.
to think that that's good, 'cause I
I'm
just
not
think
saying it's good. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying, how do you stop a dictator with a military? What defense do you have against that?
I mean, this is the thing about Stalin. He killed 40 million people or 20 million people or something.
Mhm.
20 million people, I think. And then I think Mao sort of shamed everybody by killing 40 million people. I mean, this
And
is
that's
the
the
sort
first
of
thing they did is take away
y
people's arms. They took.
sure, 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 sure. But I guess I come from a very placid country where we got rid of all our guns a couple of decades ago, where we just went, "This is crazy. We've got to get rid of all the guns," because somebody went nuts. And gee, we are so grateful for that one. That was a politician. I don't agree with his politics generally, but I went, wow, that was actually the number one best thing he ever did, as far as I'm concerned. So going
I
back to everything, we are over time,
We are,
Josh. We
and
need to time out.
sure, and I will say that, yeah, in Europe too. So I'm not totally, disregarding that, because in Europe it's kind of work too. Maybe more people are stabbing each other now, but there's something to that, and it's also a cultural mindset. But yeah, See what happens when we get into politics here. But before we end, Wendy, why don't you just say your view on that the situation with the daughter that you brought up, and then we'll take it out here. How do you feel about that?
I think it's a really I think our relationships are complex with
Yeah,
anybody. She disclosed that she has a very complicated relationship with her father. Her father could be absolutely cold, but he also could be beautifully warm. He had such contempt for her weakness because he had to do these things in the war. He felt that was important to do. That was his compassion in action. And so I think war is a thing where it brings out anything and everything in people. And in my mind, we are heading in that direction. And you're in Denmark and you're 4 minutes away from Ukraine. And Poland. This is complicated stuff that is starting to we never thought we would be here in our lifetime. And here we are.
it,
And so I think this is a very complex time and a good questioning time, that to question ourselves, well, we have this intention to do no harm, but really someone puts a gun to your fiance's head, and what are you going to do? Just say, oh, well, everybody dies? Or are you going to try and say, or are you just going to freeze on the spot, which is probably what a lot of us do? Or you just go, like, you don't know, you panic. So it's not we don't it's not a theoretical thing. I mean, I know you thought I was a thought experiment, but I think for me, what I was looking at was not to trap you or anything like that,
sure.
but to go, what is your emotional response?
Yeah,
What's your emotional reaction? How do you respond? And you go, yeah, actually, this is really hard.
yeah,
There are no clear answers here. And
sure.
I've had lots of complicated things to do with my sister who was born with a terminal illness, my father who died with a terminal who died of a terminal illness. These are complicated things
Yeah,
that I've had to live through. And I think when you live through those things, there is a kind of, well, actually things don't fit into neat and tidy. And the
exactly.
purpose of practice is to practice
Yeah,
so that when you are confronted with difficult situations, you drop to the level of your training, as they say in the Navy
yes,
SEALs or whatever
yeah,
it is. And I think that's where we have to do. So, and we did not
absolutely.
have so much compassion for each other today. I was like, "You're crazy."
No, it's these are common things when we get into heated topics. I will just say, yes, I honestly I don't know what I would do if I was in that situation, and I can theorize about it and say whatever I want. But the matter of the fact is, it's completely different because I did witness a shootout in daylight in an okay neighborhood, and it was so far different than anything I could have ever imagined it would be. I don't know if I've
Yeah.
given that story, but completely, I could have never prepared for any of that. Completely different than anything that even in the most horrible violence in movies. But I will say, if there's a war and they were to draft me, you can't put a gun in my hand and make me kill a stranger that I don't know for reasons that I don't understand by people that want to send me off. So I will immediately go to prison right away if that's the case, because you can't put a gun in my hand and make me kill someone. It's completely asinine over ideologies that I'm told about that I have no idea, and a stranger, and to program someone to go kill someone for someone they don't really even understand what's going on. It's the level of mind control or manipulation that you have to get someone to go do that is just off the charts ridiculous. To tell someone they have to go kill a stranger for some kind of ideology and things like that, which is a lot what a lot of wars are. Now it can get personal, like Wendy mentioned. That's not what I'm talking about. Talking about, yeah, starting wars and stuff. So yeah, I will go to jail right away because you can't put a gun in my hand and make me pull the trigger to some stranger for some ideology, some crazy ideology. It's asinine.
We actually, you don't know, but we should talk about those experiences if you're okay with it. Let's talk
Sure.
about our complex experiences
Sure.
and how did we respond on the spot?
Yeah,
And
let's
let's do that next time,
do
and
that.
then
Yeah.
go like, wow, this isn't easy. This is not theory.
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
practice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Perfect. And thank you guys for sticking with me. And thank you, Wendy. We've gone over here quite a bit.
Way
So,
over. All right. Sorry about that
s-
being a
s-
bit long.
may you all practice with compassion and apply it appropriately when needed. And yeah.
All right.